Our life together had always seemed to be the picture of a loving, steady relationship. Sarah and I met in college, both idealistic and hopeful, dreaming about our futures. We didn't rush into anything. We were friends first, and only after a year or two did our relationship evolve into something more serious. Our connection felt natural, as if we were two halves of a whole. We got married right after college, and we were happy, or at least that's how it seemed. For the first few years of our marriage, we lived like many young couples do. We traveled, we worked on our careers, and we enjoyed the freedom of being together without the responsibilities of parenthood. Yet, as time passed, our friends began to have children, and that desire for a family started to take root within me. I'd look at the joy their children brought them, and I found myself imagining what our lives would be like if we had a child of our own. Sarah was hesitant at first. It wasn't that she didn't want kids, it was more about the timing. She was busy with her job as a marketing executive, and I had just started my own business. There was always something we told ourselves would be a better time for a child. But as the years went on, our conversations about parenthood became more frequent. We started discussing having children more seriously, agreeing that we would try after Sarah's next promotion, or after I signed a few more clients. We promised each other that we would be ready when the time was right. Eventually, we decided that we would stop waiting for the perfect time and try to have a child. We were both in our early 30s and we felt ready. The first few months were exciting. We did everything by the book, tracking ovulation cycles, making adjustments to our diet, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. But month after month, there was no pregnancy. At first, we were optimistic. We told ourselves that it was normal to take time, but as the months turned into a year, we began to question what was happening. We went to see a fertility specialist. The tests were long and invasive, but after a few weeks, we received the devastating news. Sarah was infertile. It wasn't just a matter of timing or bad luck. Her fallopian tubes were blocked, and there was no medical intervention that could fix it. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The dream of having a biological child, of sharing that bond with Sarah, was gone. We sat in the sterile waiting room of the fertility clinic in stunned silence. I could see the pain in Sarah's eyes. She didn't cry, but I could tell the news had shattered her too. We left the clinic that day, and neither of us knew exactly what to say. I remember looking at her in the car, searching for something to offer as comfort, but nothing felt right. She kept her eyes on the road, her hands tight on the wheel. Finally, she spoke. "I'm so sorry. I didn't want to disappoint you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I reached over and placed my hand on hers. "You haven't disappointed me," I said softly. "We'll figure this out. There are other ways. We can adopt." But Sarah shook her head. "I don't know if I can do that," she said, voice cracking. "I don't know if I could love another child like I would our own." Her words hit me like a cold slap to the face. I understood her hesitation. Adoption wasn't easy, and it wasn't something either of us had ever seriously considered before. But it hurt that she wasn't immediately on board with the idea. It was as though she had already closed herself off from the possibility of becoming a mother in a different way. We spent the next few days in a heavy silence, processing the news in different ways. I knew I wanted a family, and I wanted it with Sarah, but I didn't know how we could move forward. I suggested we look into adoption, that maybe we could begin the process. Sarah agreed, but there was something distant in her agreement, as though she were merely humoring me. Over the next few months, things between us began to shift. The initial shock of the diagnosis wore off, but the tension lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was withdrawing from me in some way. She began working longer hours, saying she needed to focus on her career. She would go to dinner with friends more often, and while I didn't mind her socializing, I could feel the gap between us growing. I tried to talk to her about it, but she always brushed it off with an excuse, assuring me that she was fine, that everything was fine. But I couldn't help but notice the small things, the way she seemed to avoid touching me, the way she always seemed lost in thought. There were nights when I lay in bed, awake, just staring at the ceiling, wondering if she still wanted the same things I did. She would turn away from me in bed, her back to me, and it felt as if I was sleeping next to a stranger. We had become two people living in the same house, but our connection had diminished, and it hurt in a way I couldn't put into words. Then, one night, everything changed. It was late and we were sitting in the living room after dinner. I had just come back from a long day at work and was hoping to unwind, but Sarah seemed unusually quiet. She had a glass of wine in front of her, and though she usually only had 1 or 2 glasses, tonight she had finished half the bottle. Her face was flushed and her eyes looked unfocused, distant. I noticed that she was fidgeting with the edge of her shirt, something she did when she was anxious. I asked her if she was okay, but she didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. "I've been thinking," she began, about us and the whole adoption thing." I waited, trying to gauge where this conversation was going. "I don't think I'm ready for it," she continued, avoiding my gaze. "I don't think I can love someone else's child. I'm just not sure it's something I can do." Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I had expected hesitation, but not this. I had never seen Sarah so closed off to something. I didn't know what to say. The silence stretched on between us until I could no longer stand it. "You've been acting different lately," I said carefully. "I don't understand what's going on. You're not the same person you used to be. I don't know if it's just the infertility thing, but you're shutting me out. You're shutting us out." Sarah let out a long sigh, her face twisting with regret. For the first time in months, she looked directly at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "It's not just the infertility," she whispered. "It's more complicated than that." I stared at her, waiting for her to explain, but she didn't. Instead, she picked up her glass and took another long sip. "I've been feeling so lost," she admitted. "I've been trying to figure out what I want, what's best for us. And I've realized that maybe I've been lying to myself and to you." I didn't understand. The words she was speaking felt like a riddle I couldn't solve. She had always been honest with me, hadn't she? But in that moment, I knew that something had shifted in her, something I couldn't grasp. And what's worse, I wasn't sure I was prepared for the truth of what was about to come. She took a deep breath, and with that breath, she opened the door to something I was unprepared to face. "I lied about being infertile," she said softly, almost as if it were a confession she'd been carrying for years. The words felt like a tidal wave crashing over me, knocking the air from my lungs. "Sarah, what do you mean?" My voice was hoarse. I couldn't process what she had just said. "I lied," she repeated, her voice breaking. "I'm not infertile. I could have had children, but I didn't want to. I didn't think you'd ever stay with me if you knew the truth." I sat there, stunned, unable to speak. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had married, had been lying to me for years. The pain of that realization spread through me like wildfire, searing every part of me. The woman who had once been my best friend, my partner, had built a life on a foundation of lies. The days after Sarah's confession passed in a blur, a storm of disbelief, confusion, and lingering anger. I barely slept, spending hours lying awake, my mind racing. Her words echoed in my head, a sharp, incessant reminder of the lie that had underpinned the life we had built together. I lied about being infertile. I kept repeating that line over and over, trying to make sense of it. But it felt like a foreign language. How could she have kept something so monumental from me? We had built our entire future around the idea of not having children, and now I realized that all of it had been based on a foundation of deception. For days, I went through the motions of daily life. I went to work, sat in meetings, ate meals with Sarah, but everything felt hollow. It was like I was living in a parallel reality, one where nothing felt real anymore. Sarah acted like nothing had changed. She didn't press me for answers about what I was feeling or what I was thinking, and that, in a strange way, made it worse. She seemed to believe that the truth had been told, and now everything would somehow go back to normal, but it couldn't. I was paralyzed with confusion. On the one hand, I wanted to confront her more directly, to force her to explain why she had lied, why she had hidden this from me for so long. On the other hand, a part of me, a quiet, insidious part, feared the answers. What was the real reason behind her actions? Had she been unfaithful to me? Had she carried on an affair in secret? What else had she kept from me? I tried to process everything, but I couldn't. It felt like a suffocating weight on my chest. I found myself turning to old coping mechanisms, things I hadn't done in years. I drank too much, Spent long hours at the gym to exhaust myself, hoping that maybe physical fatigue would numb the emotional pain. But it didn't work. Each time I got into bed beside her, I couldn't shake the thought that I was lying next to someone who had betrayed me. It didn't matter that she had told me the truth now. The lie had already poisoned everything. I wanted to talk to her about what she had done, but the words never came out. Instead, we spent our evenings in uncomfortable silence, a quiet distance between us that grew by the hour. And then, one evening, something happened that shattered whatever little illusion of normalcy we had left. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through a few old boxes of paperwork I had meant to go through. It was a rainy night, and the sound of raindrops on the window helped distract me, providing some small comfort. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and I picked it up without thinking. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was short, to the point, and filled me with dread. I knocked 3 times on the door and filled me with dread. "Ethan's doing well. He asked about you. Hope you're both doing okay. He's been a little confused lately, but he's handling it." I stared at the screen, the words not making sense at first. My mind went blank as I tried to process what I had just read. Ethan? Who was Ethan, and why was someone asking about him? I immediately clicked on the contact, but there was no name attached to the number. I had no idea who could be texting me, and I couldn't understand why someone would message me about a child named Ethan. My heart began to pound in my chest. The dread quickly turned into a sick feeling in my stomach. I scrolled through the rest of the conversation, hoping for some clue, but the messages were all brief, cryptic. The final message in the thread was a picture. It was a photo of a young boy no more than 3 or 4 years old, smiling up at the camera. His blonde hair was messy, his cheeks flushed from playing outside. And as I stared at the image, it hit me. This was the same boy I had seen in one of Sarah's photo albums a few months ago. I didn't recognize the setting in the picture, but I remembered the boy's face clearly. He was familiar in a way I couldn't quite place. A sickening realization washed over me. The boy in the picture was Ethan, the child mentioned in the text. I immediately dialed the number. It rang a few times before the voicemail picked up. "This is Sarah's friend," the voice on the other end said before quickly hanging up. My stomach turned. Sarah's friend? Who was this person? And why were they messaging me about a child I had never heard of? I felt the floor fall out from under me as panic began to surge. My mind raced. The pieces were starting to fit together, but I couldn't believe what I was thinking. The child in the photo. The message about Ethan. I thought back to Sarah's confession. She had told me about her infertility, but she had never mentioned a child named Ethan. She had never mentioned any child that was not biologically ours. Was this Ethan hers? Was he the child of another man? Did she have a secret child? I couldn't stop myself. I grabbed my coat and left the house without a word to Sarah. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I drove to the address that had appeared in the message. A small daycare facility on the outskirts of town. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I could feel the knot tightening in my chest. I parked in front of the building and took a few deep breaths, trying to steady myself. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and anger. I had to be wrong, I told myself. This couldn't be happening. I had to be imagining things. But as I looked up at the daycare building, everything in me screamed that this was real. The possibility that Sarah had lied about everything, about our future, about a child, it was too much to bear. I pushed open the door, the small bell above it chiming softly as I stepped inside. The receptionist looked up at me, her face neutral. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here to pick up Ethan," I said, my voice flat, not knowing exactly what I was doing or why I was saying that name. The receptionist's brow furrowed slightly, but she smiled kindly. "Ethan, he's not here yet. His mother's picking him up later." "His mother," I repeated, suddenly feeling a cold pit form in my stomach. "Who is his mother?" The receptionist blinked, then looked down at her desk for a moment. She clearly wasn't used to being asked questions like this. It's Ms. Montgomery," she said. "Sarah Montgomery." I felt like I had been hit with a ton of bricks. My heart skipped a beat as I realized what she had just said. Ethan was Sarah's child. He was hers. the child she had kept hidden from me for all these years. My mind couldn't fully process it. I tried to stay calm, but inside everything was falling apart. I thanked the receptionist and turned to leave. My thoughts were a blur as I drove back home. Sarah had lied to me about so many things. About her infertility, about having a child with another man. How long had she known about Ethan? How long had she been hiding him from me? When I got back, I found Sarah sitting in the living room as though nothing had changed. She was reading a book, her legs curled up underneath her. She didn't even look up as I walked in, and it felt like a slap in the face. She was so casual, so unaware that the world was about to come crashing down around her. I stood in the doorway, my chest tight with rage. "You've been lying to me for years, Sarah," I said, my voice low but filled with accusation. She looked up, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Ethan," I added, trying to control my anger, "is your son, isn't he?" She froze. Her eyes widened for a split second before she slowly put the book down. Her face went pale. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I could see the panic start to rise in her chest. "Yes," she whispered, barely audible. "Ethan is my son." And with those words, everything I had believed about our life together, about our future, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The words Sarah had just uttered, "Ethan is my son," hung in the air like a dark cloud, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. It was as if my body had been paralyzed, my mind unable to process the enormity of what she had just admitted. I stared at her, my heart racing, a growing knot of disbelief tightening in my chest. How had I not seen it? How had I not noticed? The answers to these questions felt just out of reach, taunting me with their impossibility. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide and full of regret, as if she had been waiting for this confrontation, for the moment when I would finally discover her secret. She sat there in silence, her face pale, her hands trembling. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The weight of the truth pressed down on us both, and there was nothing to fill the suffocating silence between us. I took a step forward, my voice barely a whisper. "Why? Why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide this from me?" The words sounded so small, as if they couldn't possibly encompass the betrayal I felt. But they were all I could manage, a broken attempt to make sense of the world that had crumbled around me. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time since I had confronted her, I saw her vulnerability. She had always been strong, confident, the kind of person who could hold it together even in the face of adversity. But now, she seemed so fragile, so small, as if the weight of her own deception had crushed her. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to steady herself. "I never wanted to hurt you," she began, her voice shaking. "I thought that if I told you you would leave me, I couldn't lose you, not like that. I was scared. I've been scared for so long." I felt a pang of anger and sadness, a bitter combination that twisted in my stomach. "You were scared of losing me?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What about me, Sarah? What about my trust? What about our marriage? You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. You made this decision for both of us without even consulting me. How is that supposed to make me feel?" She flinched at my words, but I couldn't stop myself. The anger surged inside me, raw and unchecked. I had always prided myself on being understanding, on being patient and forgiving, but now, in the face of this betrayal, I didn't know how to control it. I had been blindsided by the one person I thought I could rely on. The person I had chosen to spend my life with. She had lied to me about infertility, about adoption, and worst of all, about a child she had been raising in secret. "I didn't know what to do," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "When I found out I was pregnant, everything changed. I didn't want to keep the baby at first. I didn't think I could. But when I saw him, when I held him, I couldn't give him up. I couldn't tell you because I didn't think you would accept him. I didn't think you'd ever understand, and I was too scared to lose you. To lose us." Her words were laced with guilt, but also with a deep, painful honesty. I could see that she was torn, that she had been carrying this burden for years. But that didn't change the fact that she had made a decision without me, had kept me in the dark about something so fundamental. I couldn't process it all at once. The flood of emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal, confusion, was overwhelming. I took a step back, feeling suffocated by the weight of everything. "I need some space," I said, my voice tight. "I need to think. I can't talk to you right now." Sarah nodded silently, and I could see the pain in her eyes. She didn't try to stop me, didn't beg me to stay. She simply watched me as I walked out of the room and left the house, the door closing behind me with a finality that felt like the end of something. Perhaps the end of everything. I drove aimlessly, my mind reeling, unable to focus on the road in front of me. The world felt like it was spinning out of control, and I had no way of stopping it. I had trusted Sarah. I had believed in her, and now I didn't know who she was anymore. The woman I had married, the woman I had loved, was she even real? Had she ever been, or was I just another part of her web of lies? I ended up at a small park by the edge of town, a place I had visited often when I needed time to think. It was empty, the swings swaying gently in the breeze, the quiet of the night settling around me. I sat on a bench, my hands clenched into fists in my lap, and let the tears fall. I didn't even know why I was crying. Was it for the years I had spent with Sarah, believing in a lie? Was it for the child I had never known about, or was it simply the overwhelming sense of betrayal that had consumed me? I must have been sitting there for an hour when my phone rang. I didn't look at the caller ID. I knew who it was. It was Sarah, of course. She had probably been calling me since I left the house, trying to make things right, trying to explain herself. I couldn't bring myself to answer. I couldn't handle hearing her voice, not right then. So I let the call go to voicemail. As the days passed, I found myself sinking further into a place of emotional chaos. I tried to distract myself with work, with friends, with anything that would keep me from facing the reality of my life, but nothing helped. I felt like I was walking through a fog, unable to see clearly, unable to find a way out. I spent hours on the phone with my best friend Alex, trying to process everything. He was one of the few people who knew the full story about Sarah and me, and his support was a lifeline, but even he didn't know what to say. "This is messed up, man," he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "I don't know how she could do that to you. How long has this been going on? How long has she been lying?" "I don't know," I replied, my voice cracking. "I don't know. She told me the truth about Ethan, but I'm not sure if I can believe anything she says anymore. I don't even know who she is anymore." Alex was quiet for a moment before responding. "You need to figure out what you want, whether you want to stay with her or not. It's not going to be easy, but you can't keep living like this." His words echoed in my mind. But I didn't have the answer. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know if I could stay with her after everything. How could I ever trust her again? How could I look at her and not see the deception, the lies she had built our life on? It wasn't just about Ethan. It wasn't just about the fact that she had kept him from me, raised him in secret. It was about the way she had manipulated the truth, twisted it into something that suited her, something that kept her comfortable. I had been a part of her lie, and I didn't know how to come back from that. When I finally did return home, Sarah was sitting in the living room, waiting for me. She didn't look up as I entered, her eyes fixed on the floor. I stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering my thoughts, trying to find the right words. But I couldn't speak, not yet. I couldn't face her, not after everything. "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've ruined everything, but I love you and I need you to understand that I never meant for any of this to happen." The words felt hollow, empty, like a last-ditch attempt to salvage something that was beyond repair. I didn't know if I could forgive her. I didn't know if I even wanted to. "I don't know what to say to you," I replied, my voice distant. "I don't know if I can do this anymore." And with those words, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The foundation of our relationship had been cracked beyond repair, and no matter how much we tried to rebuild, it would never be the same. The silence between us was deafening, and I knew that this was just the beginning of a long, painful journey. There were still so many questions left unanswered, so many wounds to heal, and I didn't know where to begin. The days that followed the confrontation with Sarah were a blur. I moved through them as if I was underwater, detached from reality, existing only as a shadow of myself. My emotions swirled in a tornado of hurt, confusion, anger, and disbelief. I couldn't escape the feeling that my life had been a lie, and I had no idea how to recover from it. I would wake up in the morning to the sound of the alarm clock, go through the motions of getting dressed and eating breakfast, but none of it felt real anymore. Everything was tainted by Sarah's secret, by the weight of the truth that she had kept hidden from me for so long. I spent most of my days at work, keeping myself busy, avoiding the silence of our home. I couldn't face Sarah just yet. She had tried to reach out to me, of course, sending texts and leaving voicemails, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I wasn't ready. The rage and pain I felt every time I thought of her, every time I thought of Ethan, were too raw, too fresh. Each night, I came home to an empty house, the silence echoing through the rooms. Sarah would be at work or out running errands. When she was home, she stayed in the bedroom, and I remained in the living room, trying to put some distance between us, trying to gather my thoughts. I knew I couldn't continue like this. I couldn't live in this limbo forever. One evening, I came home to find her sitting in the living room, waiting for me. The look on her face was one of quiet desperation, her eyes pleading with me to talk, to listen, to find some way forward. I could see that she was exhausted, emotionally drained, but she wasn't giving up. She had the same determined look she always had when she wanted something. But this time, I wasn't sure I could give her what she was asking for. I stood in the doorway for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I was tired, so tired of this emotional turmoil. I was tired of feeling like I was drowning in this mess. But more than anything, I was tired of living in a house where trust had been broken beyond repair. I had always believed in our relationship, in Sarah, in us. And now, all of that seemed so far away, like a distant memory. "Can we talk?" Sarah asked softly, her voice hoarse from the nights of crying. I nodded, my throat tight. "We can talk." She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't look at me at first, but then she raised her eyes to meet mine. There was a quiet sadness in her gaze, but also a flicker of hope. Hope that I could find a way to forgive her, that I could somehow still love her. "I know I've ruined everything," she began, her voice breaking. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to explain, but I need you to know that I never wanted to betray you. I was terrified, Ethan. Terrified of losing you, terrified of what would happen if you found out the truth. I made the mistake of thinking that if I kept this secret, it would protect us, protect you. I was wrong. I know that now. I wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to reach out and take her hand, to tell her it would be okay. But another part of me, the part that had been betrayed, couldn't forget what had happened, couldn't forget the lies, the deceit, the way she had kept me in the dark for so long. I couldn't pretend that everything would just magically be okay. "I don't know what you want from me, Sarah," I said, my voice quieter now. "I don't know what you expect me to say. I'm not sure if I can just forgive you and move on. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Everything has changed. You've changed. I don't know who you are anymore." Her face crumpled, and she wiped at her eyes, but no tears came. "I understand," she whispered. "I understand if you can't forgive me. I understand if you need space or if you need time. I just need you to know that I'm sorry. I am so, so sorry. I never meant to hurt you." The words hung in the air, heavy and fraught with meaning. I could see that Sarah was genuinely sorry, that she was feeling the weight of her actions. But that didn't change what had happened. It didn't change the fact that she had lied to me, kept something so huge from me for so long. It didn't change the fact that I didn't know if I could ever fully trust her again. "I need time to think," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I need to figure out what I want. I can't make any decisions right now. I'm not ready to make any decisions." Sarah nodded slowly, her face falling. "I understand. Take all the time you need." And with that, she stood up and walked to the bedroom, leaving me alone in the living room. The weight of the decision I had to make felt suffocating. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. Could I stay with Sarah, knowing that she had kept such a massive secret from me? Could I ever trust her again? Or was the damage done, irreversible, the betrayal too deep? For the next few days, I did nothing but think. I spent hours pacing the house, running through the possibilities in my mind. Part of me wanted to leave. Part of me wanted to walk away from everything and never look back. But another part of me, the part that still loved Sarah, the part that remembered the good times, didn't want to give up on us. I wasn't ready to let go of everything we had built together. But was love enough? Was love enough to overcome the betrayal? I spent several sleepless nights in the guest bedroom trying to make sense of it all. The pain, the confusion, the anger, it all felt like too much to bear. But I knew I couldn't live like this forever. I had to make a decision. One evening, after days of thinking, I sat Sarah down. She had been anxiously awaiting this moment, her eyes searching mine for some clue, some indication of what I was thinking. I could feel her holding her breath, waiting for me to speak. "I've thought about it," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion, "and I've come to a conclusion." Sarah's eyes widened and she took a step closer to me, her hands trembling. "What have you decided?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw the woman I had married, the woman I had loved. But I also saw the lie, the secret that had poisoned everything. I saw the betrayal, the trust that had been shattered, and I knew that I couldn't just ignore it, couldn't pretend like it didn't matter. "I've decided that I need time," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Time to heal. Time to figure out what I really want. I can't just jump into a decision. I can't pretend that everything is okay when it's not. We need space, Sarah. We both need time to figure out who we are apart from this." "Apart from each other?" She looked down at the floor, her face etched with pain. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll give you the time you need. I don't want to lose you, but I know that I can't force you to forgive me." The words were heavy, but I knew they were the right words. I didn't want to lose her, but I also didn't want to keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. We both needed to face the truth, and sometimes that meant stepping away and allowing the space for healing. The next few months were painful. Sarah and I lived in separate parts of the house, each of us processing everything in our own way. I sought therapy, talked to friends, and began to piece together the reality of what had happened. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I couldn't breathe, days when I thought I couldn't move forward. But slowly, gradually, I began to heal. I began to understand the pain I felt was not just about Sarah's lies, but about my own need to understand what had happened, to find closure. Eventually, Sarah and I had a conversation, one that would change the course of our future. We both knew that things could never go back to the way they were, but we also knew that we had a choice. We could either move forward together, acknowledging the mistakes of the past, or we could go our separate ways. "I don't know if I can forgive you completely, Sarah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I still love you. I still want to try. I need to believe that we can rebuild our relationship, one step at a time." She nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude and sadness. "I will do whatever it takes to make it right. I will work every day to rebuild your trust. I'm so sorry." And so we began the slow process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy, and there were days when it felt like we would never recover. But step by step, we worked through the pain, the hurt, and the betrayal. We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other. And sometimes, that was enough.